Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ion Canyon Podcast, your home for in depth discussion on the lore, the narrative, and the big ideas of the galaxy far, far away. My name is Joel, and I'm coming to you live from Star Wars Underworld, Orange County. Matthew's off at the moment, but I am joined by your friend and mine, Mr. Red Leader Antilles. Welcome back to the show.
Hey,
Yeah. So, Red, I got an old joke. I got an old saying about Star Wars. There are three things you need to know about Star Wars in order to understand Star Wars: Nixon, Vietnam, and cars. The vehicles, not the movie. But in all seriousness, Star Wars pulls from world history in order to tell its story. This causes a lot of interesting, but sometimes odd allegory as we look deeper into the narrative of Star Wars. We're going to talk about all that and more as we talk about historical allegory in Star Wars. I'm not sure if there's any Tractor Beam this week, but if you want to watch Tractor Beam, they're normally on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. You can follow us, of course, on the Ion Cannon Blue Sky, ioncannon.bisky.social, and of course the SWU Blue Sky as well. And of course, join the Star Wars Underworld Discord where we talk about all sorts of fun things and have game nights and movie nights galore. All right, but let's begin first with a week in Star Wars. And, a couple of weeks ago, Red, you and I talked about the glup shittos of Star Wars and how people equate, you know, make weird accusations like people like Zeb being a glup shitto just because he's in The Mandalorian and Grogu and stuff like that.
hmm
You know, it did get me thinking. I think, regardless of how you feel about the show, I think Ahsoka as a show is such an interesting case of continuing a narrative that in a lot of ways has been around since 2008 and going from one media to another and really building upon it as it has gone on, especially but doing it in a media that, unfortunately, let's face it, most people, I still feel like there's a wider audience for live action in a way animation just doesn't have. And, I think it also kind of speaks to those questions of like, well, does every Star Wars project need to quote unquote be for everyone in like the most casual audience sense? Is it okay to have stories like this continue on? And especially now in the age of streaming, where it's like, well, the Rebels is right there. It's on Disney Plus. They kind of expect you to buy the subscription to get it all, right? Like it's one thing if it's like a book you can't find anymore or whatnot, but it's like it's all in one streaming platform, you know. Um, and I know there's always a risk of like, you know, uh, impenetrability and stuff like that. Like, I kind of get that with like, say, like later Legends post Endor, where it's like, I'm gonna read the Dennings for this Troy Dennings novel. That'll be. I only seen Return of the Jedi. Let's see what's going on. What's a Jason Solo? Darth Kitus. What the Vong? What the heck is all this? Like, I kind of get that. Um, but at the same time, I'm like, well, what's also wrong with just kind of continuing up this narrative? So I don't know, Red. You're a fan of multimedia like this. Like, what's your stance on kind of this ongoing narrative and that it's just going a different media now?
uh, I think I think it's good that they are willing to move between mediums, but at the same time,
Hmm.
just storytelling wise, I do kind of wish like Ahsoka's story, for instance, had ended in Rebels. Uh, but that has more to do with like changing actors to go over to live action and having to make characters work than it does about like the efficacy of the mediums themselves.
That's fair. That's fair. It is interesting though, just kind of continuing in a different media, especially when it's so. It is a direct continuation. It's not like Saw Gerrera showing up in Rogue One. That's kind of more like a fun little Easter egg almost for if you know you
hmm
know. Um, and then you got stuff like the Mandalorian, which again is like here's the original character. Now he's kind of just viewing the the story from his point of view. So yeah, It's interesting. I'm not sure how to feel about it. I mean, I get it from like the like, oh, I don't want to see the actors change and all that. Um, although I feel like these days we're kind of casting them just in case we want to put them in live action, kind of like what Gunn's doing with his DC stuff. Um, kind of like he did something with like Creature Commandos, where he like photoshopped or not photoshopped. He like had the costumes of the Creature Commandos in their wear and whatnot, just in case they show up again in the live action stuff. Um, so yeah, I it is interesting. I'm not quite sure where to feel on it, too. Like, 'cause I mean, it kind of and it is partially execution where it's like, yeah, you shouldn't have to watch a cartoon in order to understand this show. I don't think they're intensely making you. Like Star Wars has always kind of been built on the idea of like starting from the middle. Um, how that always works is dependent on the show itself, of course. But, it is interesting. It is interesting. I'm not quite sure where I would fall on it either. Um So yeah, that's just kind of my thought of the week. But let's just get into it. Let's just get into the actual topic of history in Star Wars or historical allegory in Star Wars. So, as I said at the top, my joke is to understand Lucas's Star Wars, you got to understand Vietnam, Nixon, and cars. Um, that's partially a joke, but it's also kind of true. Star Wars has kind of taken and pulled a lot from history and Lucas has taken from his history to kind of create his mythology and this world of Star Wars from his experiences in the 60s, from his experiences with Vietnam, his fears of Nixon, all this sort of stuff. But he's also pulled from ancient history, timeless mythology, Rome, revolutions, all that stuff. And I think it's made a very interesting. I spelled it wrong in the notes, I know, but it's like a Rorschach test of what you pull out of Star Wars in terms of like the historical allegory that you take just from just the original Star Wars 1977 alone, let alone the rest of the saga. So I guess I'll toss it to you, Red. Like, what are your thoughts on just how Star Wars has used history to create its world, and how it's mingled and meshed various historical moments, both modern and past, in order to kind of create this bizarre world we all know and love called Star Wars?
Yeah, I think I mean one of the big things going in with Lucas was
Hmm.
being slated to do Apocalypse Now, and
Hmm.
then taking up Star Wars instead when he had to commit to one project, and so that Vietnam and by extension with that Congo Free State stuff like is
Hmm.
there's a historical fiction element always in there. We know George in film school was particularly interested in documentaries more than anything, and
Hmm.
Star Wars is shot like not shot like, but edited kind of more like a documentary or something like he wanted to approach things from a documentary perspective. That's why you don't have flashbacks in Lucas era. There's only like 2 or 3 shots that use slow motion.
Hmm.
It is very in camera in a way,
Hmm.
even with the later CGI VFX stuff.
Hmm.
It's just how George operates. Uh, and yeah, you can tell throughout Star Wars just how inspired, especially as time goes on. I think originally there's a little bit more vagueness. Like I don't think Empire Strikes Back is particularly calling to a historical moment. Whereas like A New Hope kind of is more so. Return of the Jedi definitely is and has more like direct ties. The prequels are incredibly post Cold War and then Bush Great War on Terror stuff. And Cologne TCW is all kinds of that. But originally, you kind of get a bit more of a timeless thing. You get more of the serials inspiration
Hmm.
going on there. The Republic isn't initially like a clear parallel to the U.S. It has some parallels to Rome. It also has some just kind of generic space empire stuff.
Yeah, even the World War II stuff too. It's like, well,
Hmm.
I don't think. Well, obviously, I don't think it's like, look. I mean, 'cause that was prominent in our pop culture still. Like, the World War II veterans were still very much alive, and a good chunk of them too. So when we say stormtroopers, I think George picked that term because it's like, oh well, I need a word that people will automatically think evil. There you go. Um,
Yeah, I mean, the original Star Wars is quite literally made with the tools of World War II. Like all the ships are hodgepodges of the models are hodgepodge are kit bashes of
mhm,
models of World War II stuff. The physical props for them are
mhm,
literally taken from junked planes and whatnot, and in London or in Pinewood. Uh, the guns are all just literally taken. Like there's all this World War II surplus still around in '77 because they're only, I mean, what, that's 20, 30?
gotta be
Yeah,
30 years less.
barely 30. 28, would that be?
I can do it. I got my calculator. Hang on. Let's see. I'll do
45 to, was 77 back to 45.
95. That equals 32 years. It's been 32.
Okay.
Right.
Uh, yeah, it's so recent. I mean, I don't know how many it would be, but definitely some of the actors in Star Wars fought in the war. Some of the people playing older characters, I'm
Oh,
sure.
sure. Or at least saw the war. Like I'm sure even if Peter Cushing didn't fight in the war, he certainly. Well, there you go. We know he saw probably the Blitz. No, he probably had to. Like probably Christopher Lee too. Like we all know Christopher Lee was like the James Bonding it in during World
Mhm.
War II, stabbing people in the back quite literally. I love that story of
Yeah,
Christopher Lee.
Guinness. So Guinness served in Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve in World War II. Uh, Received a commission as a temporary sub lieutenant in '42, temporary lieutenant the following year. Guinness then commanded a landing craft infantry at the Allied invasions of Sicily
Oh
and
damn.
later ferried supplies to the Yugoslav partisans in the Eastern Mediterranean theater. During the
Ooh.
war, he was granted leave to appear in the Broadway production of Radigan's stage play Flare Path about RAF Bomber Command,
Ooh. Oh dang! I didn't know that about the Partisans. That's kind of cool.
which would be, I'm wondering which, because I know Britain was like giving arms to both like Tito and to the Chetniks.
That's kind of
Like
funny.
just don't tell the other one. Don't tell the other one. They're gonna get really upset with you.
You don't need to tell the Czechniks. We don't need to tell the Czechniks. These aren't the weapons you're looking for. Uh, that's great. No, no, yeah. So it's interesting just just looking at the original Star Wars, just how much of that history um just influenced that movie in a lot of ways. But also, as you're right, it is vague. One of the things I find fascinating about the vagueness and kind of the quote unquote the Rorschach test of history in Star Wars is, have you ever seen the documentary Star Wars: The History Revealed? The History Channel documentary.
No, I don't think so.
Well, it's a fascinating documentary because it was made in like 2005, 2006, so before Clone Wars, but after the saga was done. So it's kind of like a retrospective. It was not Lucas. It was just a History Channel thing. Nobody from Lucasfilm was in that. But it's all other people. Like got you got actors and all journalists and whatnot, and politicians. But it's hilarious because you got all the kind of the classic act directors. Like they got a lot of the directors who people wanted at the time. Like you got JJ, you got Josh Whedon, you got like Kevin Smith and whatnot. You got like actors like Stephen Colbert. You got like Peter Jackson. Post Lord of the Rings because he's skinny. He's very skinny at that time. Um, but what's hilarious is when they get to the political stuff, they talk to like historians and whatnot. And for some reason, also Newt Gingrich is in that documentary, and he appears multiple times too, which I just find hilarious. Like,
When was this?
Like 2005, 2006,
Yeah,
like,
that makes sense. I mean,
or
he's
it's just revealed.
because
Um,
he's like the.
the legacy
I
revealed.
mean,
My bad. The legacy
uh,
revealed, and it
I
was
mean,
two.
this would be a little bit late, but like he would have within the past like couple years been like the prominent person. And wait, did Gingrich do a radio show?
It was on Fox. And it's also 2007, May 2028. So just before Clone Wars came out the next year. Um, I also had like Nancy Pelosi, like she appeared once. But yeah, it's like all these people, and he was like talking about how like he, in his mind, the rebels are like the American War of Independence revolutionaries and whatnot, and George Washington and whatnot. And while I definitely don't think that's what Lucas intended for sure, I always kind of have to say like, but I don't think you can be completely. I get why you have that interpretation though, because again, I think Star Wars is that vague. It is kind of, it is timeless as it is timely. Um, and while I definitely, you and I probably don't hold that interpretation for sure, I
Hmm.
I also think I get why you would see that. I get why you would pull that from history as well. Um, you can kind of make parallels if you want to expand on that stuff later, but I find that interesting as well from just the how Star Wars mixes and mingles its historical allegory, like the Galactic Civil War and the War of in the original trilogy. Yes, it's Vietnam if you ask Lucas. But it is also a bunch of other revolutionary wars. It's also maybe a little bit of national liberation movements. It can also maybe go back to older stuff if you want to take those parallels
I mean, it is kind of just World War II
and World
and
War II.
Vietnam in one.
Yeah, that too. It's World War II and Vietnam in one thing.
I mean, the
Um,
visual language is entirely not necessarily actually World War II, but World War II films. Well, Lucas using that for putting that stuff into the footage as placeholders and whatnot. Dam Busters being a huge inspiration on him.
yeah, and obviously the Empire, space Nazis, but also
Mm-hmm.
Nixon's administration, and that sort of thing. Ewoks. It it's interesting. Do you ever find though when you mix and mingle those historical allegories though, it gets weird at times. Sometimes, like if
Mm-hmm.
they're like it's like World War II and Vietnam, the Clone Wars being it's like a bunch of stuff. I guess we could. I
I
mentioned. Oh, go ahead.
I think that is one of the biggest flaws Star Wars has when it comes to politics stuff is it mixes and matches so much that yeah, a lot of the allegories just become confused. Like when there's inspiration for stuff, I think it makes sense and it works. It does become a problem when it tries to get specific enough to a certain point, but also clearly trying to fit an allegory within another allegory. Like we'll probably get to it later, but like the way Onderon fits into the Clone Wars is just very weird because you're trying to put proxy conflicts of the Cold War into what is very blatantly war on terror, and it's just like we'll get to that, but like there's a incongruity there that is weird, and I don't think ever really works itself out.
Yeah, I think I agree. I also think it's interesting how when you add kind of the expanded universe into the equation, and obviously you can is also how that also starts affecting Star Wars. Well,
Mm-hmm.
kind of it does and doesn't, depending on what you're following. Obviously, I do think there's still a very through line with Lucas's stuff. Although I agree with Clone Wars, that's where things get messy because Clone Wars was like, let's do everything and anything, which can be fun and frustrating. But like I think it's kind of interesting. Like once you kind of I mean, and I think the expanded universe is really like again that historical allegory Rorschach test of
Mm.
people bringing in their own biases and whatnot. I mean, everybody has them. We would too if we were writing Star Wars books. Um, like I think especially in the '90s era, I think there is a lot of post Cold War New Republic equal U.S. hegemony of the world, and the Galactic Empire is the post-Soviet system.
Yeah, there's a
It
lot of post Cold War triumphalism.
exactly, and it's interesting, and how I think weirdly, I think the expanded universe also suffers from that allegory over allegory stuff as well, especially like the post Endor era, as you kind of like if you want to like look at it as like a cohesive piece, or maybe not even cohesive piece, but just sort of like how it was built upon, where it's like, okay, you get the '90s Bantam era stuff, which is very much US triumph over Soviet Union hegemony '90s era, and then you kind of watch it morph as both the prequels are happening, so you get kind of the weird stuff of like Luke's Jedi Order starts looking more and more like the prequels, where they get a council, and then eventually they go back to Coruscant. But then you kind of also get a lot of the war on terror angle as well, with the Vong, and even the way the Empire is depicted again, and just it's in the New Republic becoming the Galactic Alliance, and it's like it makes for very interesting and messy world building as kind of you just watch the trajectory of that timeline move forward. Um,
Yeah, I mean NJO starts in '99 and ends in '03. I think like right before uh it's like right before we invade Afghanistan, right?
no, we invaded Afghanistan in 2001. We might be invading Iraq. Let me see.
No, oh sorry, Iraq. Yeah, I don't know why I thought Afghanistan. Iraq. Yeah, we're not in Iraq yet, but we're clearly going when that series wraps up. And so a lot of the anxiety or even like the hype around that is building, but it's not really there yet. But so the like that '06 sort of huge downturn in support for the war and Bush hitting like a really low approval rating, which it really starts, I guess that's more '05. Um, you kind of get like Revenge of the Sith comes out at the perfect time for that. NJO misses out on that. It has your religious fundamentalists from outside of the civilized galaxy thing, but it's not written after 9/11. Like it's '99. So it's just kind of weirdly lines up, and I do wonder how much the writers were
Um,
thinking about that afterwards. Of like, gotta be careful about this. Of like accidentally writing something uh, that could feel like Islamophobic or Orientalist in that moment.
Yeah, whoops. Also, I checked. Okay, so Unifying Force came out in November of 2003, so we were already in Iraq by that point.
Mm,
But it was probably written before
yeah,
we invaded. So, I mean, you gotta wonder, right? Well, okay, actually, what about? I wonder though if the Gulf War also affected that. 'Cause, we had the Gulf War, and
yeah.
we're still kind of on Saddam's thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, you're right. Gulf War definitely would have played an impact because I mean, the Galactic Alliance is kind of that first coalition. Because
Yeah.
like that's one of the last things Gorbachev does is be like, we're buddies with you now. Well, we'll send in the tanks with you. Uh, that like that's right at the end of the Cold War, or sort of once the Cold War's over, really. And yeah, that new hegemony of stuff. But you get a lot of
Mhm.
that shift towards anxieties about either post collapse states or just other like smaller third party kind of factions with like the Yavatha are a good example of that, of the colonized. It's very much a scary outsiders. What if the slaves rose up against the empire and it went too far, kind of thing? But it definitely reflects that mindset. I mean, the reverse engineering the stuff was kind of feels like the fear mongering about a dirty bomb, a dirty nuke, the nuclear briefcases, things that he had all over like the news and in airport spy thriller fiction for like the 90s and 2000s, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because and thinking of War on Terror stuff, it's funny. I started reading Labyrinth of Evil, which came out September. Actually, paperback was January of 2005, and funny enough, also written by James Luceno. Because that's I love that book, by the way. It's hilarious. I got the audio book, the unabridged audio. It just came out. It's very brand new. Um, but that book has a lot more of like the more ooh, we don't like you can like I mean it's 2005, probably written though in 2004, but you can maybe that's when the shift starts to happen. We're like, oh man, we don't know how we feel about Palpatine's airport security procedures now, and like there are clones everywhere with guns just in
Yeah,
public
and I mean
parks.
there were plenty of people who were opposed from day one. I'm sure Luceno, who's
Right.
tapped into a lot of
Mhm.
stuff, was cognizant of the weirdness of everything and the shift in how, because I mean Revenge of the Sith, the movie, and especially Stover's novelization
Mhm.
play with that. There's that whole scene with Mace talking about all the emergency powers they've
Mhm.
given Palpatine, and then looking at the gunship. It's just the extended version of that scene from the movie, and like looking at the out the gunship and all the clones marching on Coruscant streets and saying, "Do you feel secure? Like, do we feel safe? Like, is that what you call this?" And it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, it's something that changes over the course of the prequel trilogy. Lucas is clearly already telling a story about overreach of the executive branch and the Valorum is Clinton kind of thing. Like that's definitely present. Newt Gunray is the freaking villain.
Exactly.
Lot Dodd. Like we're getting all these references to people,
Mhm.
and then 2 years after that film comes out, we're at war. Bush is ascending to more power than Lucas's fears about Nixon ever even could have been. It's all realized in real time. Uh, and Star Wars kind of has to keep up with that of like how do you predict or how do you be prescient when when the reality is outspeeding you to an extent.
No, I mean, regardless how you felt how it ended, I always will kind of low key find it fascinatingly hilarious that I'm gonna say by accident, quite frankly, but we could be cynical for a hot second, but how JJ and Kasdan kind of accidentally stumbled into what would be the 2010s and 20s
Mm-hmm.
with the First Order. Uh, that I find that hilarious. But I mean, look, I mean, all art has to deal with that to some extent because you're always writing it like a year before. Most scripts aren't being written the day of.
Yeah.
Um, it's sort of like the Superman, James Gunn Superman. Like, yeah, you can say there's an allegory about what's going on in the Middle East. I don't know if Gunn was writing it when he was if that was all going on when Gunn was writing it. I don't
Well,
wouldn't
when
know.
Gunn was writing it, I believe it was originally more like Eastern European, and then the Russia Ukraine stuff went into
Right.
like a more active shooting war. Obviously, the war had been going on since 2014,
Right.
but like that was they were like, okay, we have to change this, and then I guess he was like, okay, fine, we'll shift towards the Middle East. Now we're like the news at the time. It's like, okay, we'll shift a little bit and make it less obviously that, and maybe orient in a different way. And so it's clear the relations there are
Mhm.
very different. I mean, the side that's attacking being a U.S. armed
Right.
ally is a big change in that. Unless his idea was and I very much doubt this, that his idea was
Alright.
that Jaranapol, for the country that we're kind of watching and rooting for, is the Donbass. I don't think that's what James Gunn would be doing politically. Uh,
Yeah,
with the U.S. armed Lex Luthor armed people attacking the
no,
minority population there. I don't think he's talking about Donetsk. It'd be
I
fun, but yeah.
yeah,
But he shifts it, and then we get into the most recent just overdrive
mhm,
of the destruction and genocide of the Palestinians. And it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And there's clearly stuff in there that is like it's clear that it shifts very much to being about Gaza in a
mhm.
lot of ways visually. The stuff with the kid with the flag, I'm like, that has to be Second Intifada, because I mean you've seen like those photos of like the little kid with the rock in front of a tank
Yeah, yeah.
and stuff like that. It's like there's no way that was not
Mhm.
a major visual inspiration going on there.
Yeah, exactly. We can come back to Clone Wars in a hot second, but I kinda wanna build on this with Andor season 2 and the Gorman Massacre. Could
Mhm.
also, Andor season 2 that comes out in 2025, all that stuff is going on. Mon Mothma uses the literal word genocide, to describe what happened. I do wonder though, and I'm kinda curious to get your take on this for a couple of things. I've heard people talk about this, is obviously, I'm sure Gilroy was also very in tune with what was going on. I'm not sure when season 2 is being written. It's again one of those situations where it's like, when was this written? When they kind of shift, that sort of thing.
I
Um,
think he said that the scripts were essentially like I think I think the scripting process was done, he said, before October 7th, but I mean, who
eh,
knows how much was changed and rewrites and stuff during.
but also, I'm curious. But I think what's interesting about the Gorman massacre as sort of the quote unquote allegory for what's going on today, um, is that, and this is kind of where I feel like Star Wars is mixing and mingling is very interesting. Is like, it, Gorman obviously. I don't know how well Gorman works as a Palestinian allegory,
Yeah.
because of Gorman's like a French town. They seem like they have it much better off, than even like in
Mhm.
Superman with the Joanne with the I don't want to call it Piranapur, but that's Black Lagoon. With the with the I forget the Joannapur. Or is that the people attacking? Oh,
Jaranapur, I think.
Joannapur, like where the arc is kind of like desert folk. Where it's like Gorman seems nicer. Gorman seems a little bit more organized. And obviously, yes, what the Empire does is just horrible, of course. And gets the point across. But again, it's one of those situations where it's like, I mean, look, I honestly do think it is, if you are reading into that, what people are saying, then yes, absolutely. I don't think you should deny that. I know some people try
Mhm.
to, but Mon Mothma was using that word, the word genocide, here.
Isn't
Um,
Gorman's total population smaller than the Gaza Strip?
I don't know. I don't know if
I
they
think
said
it
it.
is.
Well,
They
maybe
definitely say Gorman's population, and it is like very small.
that's true, but it is also like it's also a nice French town, so
Mhm.
it's getting a little weird. Where it's like it's both weird Gaza and French resistance, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely the Gorman themselves are definitely it's all French resistance stuff.
Mhm,
Uh and yeah, I mean they are just speaking like a not patois, but like a version of French uh for the Gorman language. There's all there's a bunch of stuff going on there. I think part of it is the prescientness is just the playbook is the same over and over again.
true.
Like I mean the stuff that's especially impactful, I think, is the seeing the reality of the protest and then cutting to the Cyril walking by and the journalist is already like, who will put down these violent attackers? Like they're all like in Cyril's face of like realizing like, oh, they've already decided for like the public is already deciding in their minds and being told and accepting that these
Mhm.
people need to be exterminated. Like that's already happened. The mental switch has already gone off on that. Uh And that is something that is very, that news speak and like that kind of manufacturing consent is obviously something that's been on maybe the most blatant display it has ever been since the Nazis, genuinely, maybe even more so. Uh, with gossip, the way that's been handled, the way media has treated that. I need to read it, but Citations Needed, the podcast.
Ooh, no, but that's I'll have to look them up.
Are there they two of the people who used to work for Fairness and Accuracy and Reporting, fantastic podcast. Talk a lot about media. I mean, their tagline is the history of what is it? Media lying and the history of bullshit. And it's all about just two people who work in journalism who hate the field of journalism essentially, and just talking about how the sausage is made. Uh, and it's and like talking about the rhetorical strategies and argumentative stuff that goes into that. And one of them, Adam Johnson, wrote a book called oh my gosh, what is this? Why am I forgetting the?
Oh no.
Why am I forgetting the name of the book? Uh, How to Sell a Genocide: The Media's Complicity in the Destruction of Gaza, which like just came out earlier this year, and is like essentially a more of a survey because that's a lot of what Fairness and Accuracy Reporting does, is like report on specific language used, of like look at like every single time the BBC will mention Gaza, every time they will mention Russia, every time they mention Iran, and look at the type of languages used, what is it, passive voice, stuff like that, like statistical surveys, uh, stuff. And it's like, yeah, that has been, some of the stuff Adam and Nima Shirazi have done, and a lot of other journalists is nailing that of like, this is at an all-time high. And so on some level, it has to be Gaza, whether that's the
Right.
intention or not,
Right.
because as that's coming out, we are seeing everything that is alluded to or Gilroy might be kind of trying to talk about being mask off, shown in the most blatant sense.
Right. Right. Yeah. I agree. I never bought the people who were like, no, it didn't have anything to do with the mod. Like, no, that's not how this works. No, I would agree with that as well. Yeah, and it is, and again, like Star Wars is timely and timeful.
Mm-hmm. But I do think
I
also like because with Gorman, it's interesting because we are sort of doing the thing that Star Wars does a lot and that Goa does a lot of, just throw a bunch of different tidbits and stuff in.
Mhm.
Uh, Sort of everything has some pull from history and whatnot, and to the point that it's not really an allegory for anything. You have like the radio message thing is an allusion to a bunch of stuff. In that case, it was particularly the Prague Spring, but that is a very different situation than uh, like a genocide. That's a government crushing dissent thing, on its own. Or I mean, I guess that is kind of more of an occupying thing, but like that is a different situation than
Mhm.
uh, your Gaza's or oh my god, I came up with the Mexico City Olympics, like student protests getting shown up was another thing that I saw a lot of parallels in, just in how they uh, surrounded them. Or I know there was even some stuff where they said, I think someone involved in the production had said like it was sort of inspired by the sniping that happened during the Maidan coup in 2014, which is funny that you can take that in so many different ways that they don't necessarily intend, but just the nature of how complicated actual history is. Because I think the assumption of what they were trying to portray, if that was a parallel, was uh, the Ukrainian government shooting at the protesters, but then you have a lot of evidence and a lot of historical debate now happening and trials within Ukraine itself over the fact that a lot of that was almost certainly carried out by people who are pro Maidan, and so there's the false flag element and stuff. So it like on multiple levels that aren't even intended reflects that. But we also cannot really call it an allegory because it's not trying to say something specific about that moment. It's pulling on
Yeah.
the vibes, and it does become, I think, a little dangerous when
Hmm.
fans take the allegorical thing as a substitute, which I have found Andor fans to do with a lot of stuff.
Oh, I mean, I think, I mean, Andor fans, yes. I think fans in fiction just do that in general. And I think it's trying to simplify things all the time. Like, look, do I like making fun of, like, Palpatine's like Trump? Like, do I like doing the Jedi, they suck, Order 66? Yeah, I like doing that. But, like, you know, Palpatine is not like, or like Palpatine is Nixon. As much as I joke about, say Palpatine is Nixon, and yes, I do think George was taking that Nixon fear. Palpatine
Mm.
is a bunch of horrible people. He's every horrible person. He's every He's just
Yeah,
the
and he's also
politician.
barely a person. Like
Exactly too.
his rise is inspired by Caesar. He is not Julius Caesar.
He ain't, or like how when people say like Palpatine's like Hitler. It's like, I don't think Palpatine fought in a war and went crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
You
It's
know,
like there is no like existing. I mean, he's the one orchestrating the war that causes people to become hardened, like malleable fascists.
Mhm.
In the first place, there's intentionality in Star Wars because it is a narrative that you are creating, and so things are decided on because the writer decided on it, not because of cause and effect in the real world.
Well, let's get to the Clone Wars then, because again, I think the Clone Wars is honestly even more that is the most war is out of all the conflicts in Star Wars, which I think has a lot of the weirdest parallels. It is World War II. It's World War One. It's the War on Terror. It's 9/11. It's we can get to Alderaan eventually. It's for some reason the Cold War proxy war, and it really depends on who was writing it at the time. Like, again, it does have that World War One thing where it's like, yeah, this is kind of the war that kind of made people a little crazy. Um, but it also kind of weird because, and as much like I love the clones and but it's also kind of weird. It's like a lot of the fighting wasn't really done by regular people; it was done by clones. It was done by slave armies. It's the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Civil War a little bit, which also kind of has odd implications. I had a friend. I wasn't quite sure what he was getting into because I never got to ask of like why the Clone Wars being a Civil War allegory is also kind of maybe problematic. But it's like it's a little bit there. It's called the enemy is called the CIS, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Um, Replace one word, you get states. Planets' rights, not really.
That would be CSS,
Oh, that's,
which is the Navy. It's the Confederate Navy in Star Wars. That I believe they use CSS as their designator, which is what the real Confederate states Navy
cool.
did.
Oh, cool.
Uh,
Um,
Confederate state ship. But yeah, the CSA. I mean, they call themselves the Confederacy constantly throughout the movies. They're not saying even CIS in the film. They're saying Confederates or Confederacy. Dooku, I believe, is designed partially on Robert E. Lee.
mhm. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. I mean, it's the beard. You got it. The Republic consolidating, is very similar to how the U.S. really consolidated during the Civil War, how we kind of really became a nation in the
Mm-hmm.
truest sense. Um, you know, but it's one of it's this odd mission, but it'd be like if Lincoln at the end declared himself emperor. Uh, but again, like, and then you get into the point you were talking earlier. But again, it's like at the same time, and this is where I think we gotta be careful. And this is why I always kind of talk about like people who like want to compare Palpatine or Trump to Palpatine or something like that, and like every dictator. Like, you do realize that these actual dictators, like, you realize at the end of the day, Star Wars, for better or worse, and for the fun of it, because still fantasy, is the Rise of Palpatine is like this Illuminati level conspiracy theory on like
Hmm.
the most like crazy scale. I actually have like, and we can get into this later. I actually kind of have like a reason why even today I still think the Rise of the First Order is actually more interesting than the Rise of Palpatine. I can get into that later.
Hmm.
But you know, like, again, it's this grand conspiracy where Palpatine is just playing chess with himself in a way. Like, I'm sorry, not even the most savviest politician, dictator wannabe could do that. Like, not even Hitler did that. Like, he took advantage of stuff, sure, but who didn't? But like, even he wasn't like playing 3D chess with like on that scale.
Well, yeah, I mean, partially because he was kind of an idiot,
That too.
like in a way that goes beyond just the evil thing, but like also just kind of a dullard.
That too.
Like that there are people, there are people who can have larger machinations, but a lot of even people who maybe play. But the only person I can really think of who plays both sides and sets up armies like that is uh what's his face, Louis XIV, the last, whichever the last king of France of the Capets was, and he was uninterested in war and in leading and didn't want to do that. He wanted to freaking use his telescope. That's not a metaphor and a euphemism. He literally just like wanted to play with his telescope and stuff. He did not want to be king. Like that's the only person I can think of in that situation, because he was literally the Austrian army that was besieging Paris or was about to attack Paris
Mhm.
was literally being sent for him to leave Paris and take command of. Like his in-laws sent him an army to ravage his own country with. It's the closest you really can get to Palpatine, and it's the absolute opposite of a Machiavellian figure.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, like again, Palpatine is like what we fear, but like no real politician is like this. Palpatine's honestly, I think, too smart and too clever to be a real life politician. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Um, and honestly, I mean, it's another thing about when people always compare him like to Trump and Hitler or Mussolini. It's like one of the other reasons why I always find that weird. It's like, but isn't the Palpatine like the opposite of those guys? Because like he's like starts out as like, well, I don't even want power. I'm just a kindly senator. Like, I don't want this emergency power. I just want democracy. You know, when he gets
Yeah,
mask off, then he's all like, the Jedi will be crushed. Yeah. But then it's like, his right to power is just like, I was again listening to Labyrinth of Evil, and he's like to Mace Windu, like, I know that the Jedi are not rogue. Like, it's the Senate that always thinks such horrible things. Like, I am the most pro Jedi ever.
yeah.
Don't.
It's like the people who are like that in real life are usually like military strongmen types
Hmm.
who come into power on the claim of being apolitical and neutral, but that's not really the type Palpatine is playing at. Because like you look at like the military coup against Vargas in Brazil in the '60s, that was their thing. Was
Hmm.
essentially revolts kept happening. The military kept being involved in them, or cracking down heavily on people to the point that people would do revolts,
Hmm.
and then they proclaimed there's a secret plot uh, about to happen, and so that they have to save the nation from a civil war by uh, assassinating or making kill himself the president, uh, Vargas, and declaring martial law. But like their whole thing was they were preventing a civil war. That was the whole framing of it, and there was kind of a we don't want to take power, but then of course they have it for until like the late '70s.
It's funny. The another two great examples of that are Pinochet and Zia al Haq, who I think were both kind of appointed because they felt like, oh, they don't have any ambition, like they're kind of just
Yeah,
there, and
I mean
then
Allende literally picks because there was like the military was like given weird amount of authority in Chile already to
Mhm.
the point that like the military was able to essentially override the president if like one post of like the I forget what the position is, but like if one high up military post who's in the cabinet decides that yeah they can go ahead and do it,
Mhm.
but the guy who they picked for it, despite being very much like an anti-communist, was like, no, I'm gonna like what? No, screw you, I'm not gonna kill the president. And so he just accidentally, I guess, a car full of car drove by and shot him and his driver with military weapons. So I guess just a gang just randomly got military weapons and uniforms in an armored car and drove by and killed the guy. And
Yeah.
then Allende personally picked out Pinochet because he was like, well, Pinochet doesn't seem ambitious. And he assured me personally that he
He
has
pinky
no
sweared,
intention of
man.
power.
He
Yup.
pinky
And it's
sweared.
like, that's the guy he picked
Mhm.
to be like, yeah, he has no ambitions. That idea has worked out like twice, maybe. Like there was the coup in Peru, uh, in the '60s that got Velasco into power,
Mhm.
and everyone was like really weirded out. People thought it was like an American-backed coup, and then it turns out the military actually among themselves were like, none of us who were involved in leading this should take power. We should vote amongst ourselves, though, on who would be a good caretaker. And they picked like the least ambitious guy who was a military guy, but was not one of the coup plotters and was not someone with prominent power. And that's how Velasco comes into power. And everyone, from America to the Soviets to China, is like, well, what the heck is this going to go? And then Velasco's like, let's do land reform. And like he makes mistakes and stuff, but it is a military government, but it is like weirdly actually the best case scenario you're gonna get out of that. And I guess maybe the decisions after the guy after Ben Bella in Algeria. I mean the guy after Ben Bella, after he dies, the what is it called? Because Algeria is technically like decides or previously had decided its leader based on like a revolutionary council that was people
Are
involved
you
in the
talking about Boumediene, or are you talking about?
yes, whose name I can never pronounce correctly. Yes, after he passes away, because he had a terminal illness, but he kept that private from everyone, like
Yeah,
including
yeah.
like his family, until he just suddenly dies. Um, and the Algeria picks its leaders.
Shadi Ben Jidid Ben
Yes,
Jidid. Yeah.
yes, and he is elected because by the Revolutionary Council, who decide to pick like a moderate figure. They don't like the military's heavily involved, the party's heavily involved. So they're like, well, no one major in either faction
Mhm.
then. But yeah, so the point is like Palpatine is the embodiment of evil and taking power. Like he isn't Caesar, he is Caesar taking power made manifest. He's
Right.
Hitler burning down he's the Reichstag and the Enabling Act in a person. Like he's not the person who did those things.
Exactly. Although honestly, I think another good comparison actually for Palpatine, Napoleon III, because he was kind of seen as like an idiot by
Yeah,
everybody, and he kind of was, to be
I
fair.
mean there's a reason he's literally the reason we have
Then-
the Marx quote. Hegel writes that history happens twice. What Hegel did not deign to write was that it happens once as tragedy and then again as farce.
And then, funny enough, it's like, well, yeah, he's an idiot, and then he cooed you guys, became
Well, yeah,
emperor for
that's what
just
he was saying was that he did the 18th Brumaire, the eve of the 18th Brumaire, and he's of Napoleon, which was Napoleon taking power, and he's like that text is called the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon because it's the farce version. It's the bumbling idiot stump like Napoleon's an a-hole for ruining the revolution, but Marx is like at least he had competence, at least he had aura. Who's this loser?
I've always said Palpatine was kind of a Bonapartist in like the Marx sense, and I stick with that.
Mm,
Um, 'cause just like him, when his regime he dies, his regime ends with him. But no, you're absolutely right. He is that is Palpatine. and the war and the Clone Wars is the enabling act. It is World War One. It is the embodiment of a big bad event happening and people going crazy, and that it is 9/11. It's World War One. Like I think my co-host is Canadian. I'm sure he probably understands to some extent, but I am kind of curious of like, hi Matthew, if you're listening. If again, you gotta kind of understand, and I think Lucas was probably keen on this as well. Like he probably saw this fear of like people kind of went crazy after 9/11. And like again, you and I would talk about it. Frank Miller went kind of crazy after 9/11.
Yeah.
That's why we got modern day Frank Miller instead of past make Frank Miller. Or like again, World War One. Like I'm sure you can think of some examples. I can't, but I swear I've heard stories of like, you know, good once prominent leftist, socialist, communist activist. World War One happens. Full on right wing now. I'm a nationalist.
I mean, in a weird way, it wasn't the war itself, but the Italian left being one of the only left wings in
Mhm.
Europe that actually, I mean, it cut itself in half, but that even half were against the war was unique, and that very fact made Mussolini turn hard right. So it wasn't the war itself, but it was the fact that there was a split and that a prominent section of the Socialist Party
Mhm.
and the left, old left, I think is what it was called, slivers of that went against the war, and Mussolini was very upset about that and kind of rides to prominence on being the pro-war socialist and then the pro-war whatever he is, and then the we'll name ourselves after the faces, and that's how we get all that stuff. But yeah, a lot of people, the Clone Wars is interesting because it is allegorical, to the American Civil War. I think something that I mean, you said you've been listening to a More Civilized Age, and I love that podcast. But one thing they do that sometimes gets annoying, frustrating, is treat the Clone Wars as like a one-to-one thing of kind of, well, the Republic is clearly inspired partially by the United States and the American Empire.
Mhm.
And so they will approach every metaphor or allegory or in-universe situation from that perspective when that's clearly not always helpful. Where it's like the Republic isn't literally the US, and its enemies are clearly, like the parallel stops at a certain point, particularly because the Confederacy of Independent Systems is not Al Qaeda, and it's never meant to be Al Qaeda. It's not meant either to be like Barbara Lee opposing, Bush going to war and stuff. Like it's a weird situation, and that's where it becomes the American Civil War parallel, which I
Right.
think a lot of people just don't talk about. But it's like the we metatextually know that it is Palpatine as Bush, and honestly more so as Cheney,
Yeah.
with George being incredibly based and understanding the reality. Again, he names a freaking character Halle Burton for Finelli.
Exactly.
He gets what's happening there. He
Mhm.
understands
Mhm.
how certain events played out. And that we know that as the audience, but we do have to approach the Clone Wars also from the perspective of people in universe don't know that, and so we kind of in TCW as a show will approach some situations with its like the morality of the arc is clearly working from the perspective of if the trappings of the Clone Wars that Palpatine sets up are actually true,
Mhm.
and then sometimes it's operating from the point of view of we all know everyone's being played, and you do kind of have to just switch between those. Otherwise, some stuff just doesn't work thematically, because there
It
are points where it is like, well, the set like we know Palpatine's behind it all, but all the
Mhm.
characters involved, and for all intents and purposes, the reality on the ground is flawed Weimar Germany versus the Confederate States of America.
Yeah, this is why, and I think you've seen some of my episodes of the podcast. I've always going like I always have to go so hard on like I I think because people don't quite get that. That's how you get those extremes, and I do think they are extremes of, you know, oh, the Jedi got what they deserved and
Yeah.
whatnot. It's like I hate that, But also, I'm like, I mean, look, is it funny when I watch Labyrinth of Evil or the Revenge of the Sith novelization? I think it was Labyrinth of Evil. Was Labyrinth of Evil? Yeah, it was Labyrinth of Evil, where Yoda was, talking to Obi-Wan because they found out about Sidious, and Obi-Wan was like, what? Remember when Dooku said about Sidious, and then Yoda's like, hmm. If Sidious really controlled the Senate, he did. Wouldn't Separatists be controlling the core by now? Wouldn't Separatists have won the war? Um, I mean, I find that funny, or even the
Mhm.
Revenge of the Sith novelization of Mace Windu going, "Well, it can't possibly be Palpatine. He already controls the galaxy. He's out."
Yeah.
That's funny, but sometimes they're like, "Yeah, right. Well, we got to remember, yeah, these characters don't know. We know that everyone's getting played, but we got to kind of think about that. But I also think that um I think sometimes also, and some of this I may also just say it might be just people projecting their own ideologies onto Star Wars, which is fine, per se. But I also think that because again, Star Wars is a fictional world, it doesn't inherently have to follow our, our real world realities too much. That when people think Republic, like you said, they think the US, and I think they see the Senate like our Senate, which sucks. Which our Senate does suck, of course. But
Mhm.
I think they also see like, oh, the Republic is just liberal democracy and all the trappings of that and whatnot. Whether you're full on communist, Marxist, Leninist, anarchist, like I don't want that. But it's like, and I mean that's fine. You can have those critiques, and if you want to explore that, that's fine. But like again, the Republic is a fictional government, and even though yes, obviously, I'm not saying George said it was utopia or anything like that. It's not Star Trek. I also think that people think that you know, oh, the heroes are just fighting for liberal. It's sort of like when people say, "Oh, Mon Mothma's a lib" or something like that. Like, y- y- I think, I think that like it's still fictional. So it's like the Senate doesn't have to operate like our Senate does. I mean, obviously, it probably did to some extent because obviously that's kind of the point of the whole the Republic got
Mhm.
corrupt and Sidious used that. But I also think that I kind of do think that when George talks about, oh, the Republic was good once. It was a good thing. The Senate was wise, and in that kind of fictional, like there was a golden age. I think he does somewhat believe that. I don't think it's like the U.S., which was kind of always born out of the blood of natives that got killed. It's like I think the
Mhm.
Republic was once a good thing that got corrupted, but couldn't get uncorrupted. I actually do think that George always believed the Republic could be good one day again. Maybe I mean I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean to be fair, we never got his Reconstruction trilogy. I don't know if he would have even gone that way or if it would have just come out of cheesy. But I also think that like sometimes maybe people project too much on the Republic as the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the other things is like people talk about the contradictions of the Republic that are tearing it apart and making it completely feckless.
Hmm.
And it's like that is completely valid and true, but that break is happening. That is what the Clone Wars are.
Right.
Like when people want to say like the Republic needs to go because the corporations control it, and it's like, yeah, the corporations who make people's lives worse in universe, who are now the ones revolting against it. Like the Republic is still the broken, weird, decrepit system that it was in Episode One,
Mhm.
but now it is weirdly in this crucible where it's fighting with that same system still more or less intact against the people who are responsible for the decrepitness. So, like, if you don't know Palpatine's behind it all, it does seem like, and materially kind of is, the Republic resolving, though, excising itself, which is how you get the weird thing with like TCW never really explaining of how the banking clan and trade federation are still part of the Republic,
Yeah,
and
so
we play so fast and loose with which planets are part of it. And I think that show just never really it gets too confusing.
see, that's what I've never. That's I mean, yeah, I do agree, and unfortunately, I don't think newer material has really fleshed that out. At least I can't think of any off the top of my head of like how newer material has tried to flesh that out in terms. Because again, I always did go with the pre TCW line of like I thought it was like the corporations like literally just broke from the galaxy and just decided to form a revolt. TCW kind of plays it more like they're funding both sides. Which I mean, to be fair, I think corporations would do in the
Mm-hmm.
real world. To be fair, if there was a civil war in the U.S. today, all the big corporations would probably fund both sides and just see what happens. Um, Whereas in the Confederacy was more of a bottom up kind of like democratic, well, democratic thing that Dooku kind of rallied together and whatnot. But yeah, I never quite got like, well, is so Newt Gunray's on the council and viceroy of the Trade Federation, but the Trade Federation's still with the Republic, so is he not the viceroy?
Well,
Is
yeah, he's definitely no longer the viceroy, but they're like, because there's the new guy who we see, but who's also a separatist, but secretly, and no one ever kicks them out. And it's how I think on More Civilized Age gets to a funny point when they talk about Mandalore, when they sort of realize just how they really want the metaphor to work and for it to be interesting, but then kind of come to the conclusion of like, I don't think anyone actually thought through what the heck these people like what Mandalorians are. I mean, they also came to like a very funny realization of about Satine, where they were so pro Satine, and then once they get to Rebels and sort of start talking more about the Mandalorians, they were like, that whole thing where Satine keeps talking about how there's 10,000 star systems that support her independent thing. Are we sure those are like individual systems and not just like 9,000 of those are Mandalore's former colonies, and she's kind of just trying to resuscitate the Mandalorian Empire in a weird way? Like,
whoops.
because what are those systems exactly?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's from
like
all.
they're it's a weird situation. Uh, but and you have stuff like Orn Free Top being independent, but also part of the Republic and being part of Palpatine's close crew and stuff. But yeah, I think the American Civil War stuff has really fallen off with
Mhm.
the Clone Wars, and that is very disappointing. And it's weird because Lucas himself is partly responsible for that in TCW, but also is the one who most seriously pushed, like, because here's his prelude to
Mhm.
Shatterpoint. That is like his kind of political statement on what the Clone Wars is,
Right.
where like there's I don't think he says like it's sort of in universe or kind of just a narrator, but like the point I think he's making is beyond Palpatine there is an actual conflict happening. It's for 1,000 years the Old Republic prospered and grew under the wise rule of the Senate and the protection of the venerable Jedi Knights. But as often happens when wealth and power grow beyond all reasonable proportion, an evil fueled by greed arose. The massive organs of commerce mushroomed in power, the Senate became corrupt, and uh, an ambitious named Palpatine, I don't know what this, I think senator or politician, named Palpatine was voted Supreme Chancellor. Most disturbingly, the Dark Lords of the Sith reappeared after 1,000 years' absence. In the midst of this turmoil, a separatist movement was formed under the leadership of the charismatic former Jedi Count Dooku. By promising an alternative to the corruption and greed that was rotting the Republic from within, Dooku was able to persuade thousands of star systems to secede from the Republic. Unbeknownst to his followers, Dooku himself was a Sith Lord, acting in collusion with his master Darth Sidious, who over the years had struck an unholy alliance with the greater forces of commerce and their private droid armies. The turning point came when Dooku lured the unsuspecting Jedi into a trap, yada yada yada. And then, having already been granted emergency powers in the face of the growing threat, Chancellor Palpatine uses his used his ironclad grip on the Senate to seize even greater authority, all in the name of security. To address the urgent military needs of the Republic, he enlisted the Jedi Knights as generals to command the clone army. The Jedi valiantly accepted their assignment, though never having served as military commanders, they were unaccustomed to the wages of war. The ranks, once sufficient to serve as guardians of peace and justice, were spread perilously thin in the face of an unthinkable challenge. The relationship with Palpatine grew strained. At the same time, they felt their own power waning, even as the most promising new apprentice completed his training and stood poised to fulfill his destiny as the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. The Clone Wars raged for 3 long years, tearing the Republic apart and spawning countless tales of heroism, bravery, treachery, and betrayal as both sides fought to defend their ideals. As dedicated as the Separatists were in their resolve to create a new order to replace the falling Republic, the Jedi were equally determined to preserve the Republic and defeat the Sith, who they understood all too well were the masterminds of the Separatist movement. They still believed in the Republic, still deemed it worth saving. Their faith, which gave them superhuman strength in the mind-boggling power of the enemy, had yet to be shaken.
Yeah, and another reason why I kind of wish we had more of that Civil War angle is because the Clone Wars is a civil war. It's honestly more of a civil war than the Galactic Civil War, if I'm going to be honest. And like a civil war, that's kind of where, unfortunately, like you said, a lot of these contradictions get resolved violently.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, the Jefferson and the Hamiltonian debates, the Federalists versus the Democrat Republicans, is resolved in the Civil War.
Exactly, and it's interesting because like again, I feel like almost you kind of have and then you get but they got the two factions, and then within the two factions, Palpatine purges part of that coalition, the Jedi, out of it, and kind of in some sense, and this is where I can kind of see where this notion that I've noticed lately in Star Wars, both in Rebels and in that book I like, Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, talking about how people kind of talk about how the Republic and Separatists kind of both lost to the Empire, as if the Empire is like the secret third faction kind of works, where it's like, yeah, the Republic split, Palpatine purges a faction of the elite in the Republic, the Jedi and the kind of their sympathizers, like, or marginalizes them. Like I would consider like Bail and Mon in that faction. Padme's dead. He purges the corporations that are alien dominated, and that faction as well. That kind of gets lost in current stuff because we don't really do the humanocentric thing anymore with the Empire that much. And then the Empire forms out of it. And that's how you solve that contradiction, with Palpatine just strong-arming everybody. Congrats.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I've never asked you this. What do you make of kind of that notion? I'm sure you've heard it before, of like, when people say, "Oh, both the Separatists and the Republic lost, and the Empire won," as if the Empire was the secret third faction the whole time.
Yeah, I think it's clear the Republic won. I mean, it's still like their institutions. It is sort of, especially because of how much Lucas is driving home and how important what he's saying is with the Bush parallels and everything to the Republic being the Empire. Like all of the stuff that was previously the hegemony of the Republic and the sort of accidental or like bumbling totalitarianism. I don't like that term, but like, what would you even call it? I guess just hegemony, or like informal empire, maybe, of the Republic that kind of can't even govern itself, but is an empire just sort of by the nature of the fact that there's no real alternative to it. And that it's been around for so long, and so many things have been incorporated into it, so many treaties signed and whatnot, is able to become the empire so easily, because it kind of already is that just one type of the empire becomes another, and the Republic. It's like, for people in certain places screwed up by the Republic, nothing has changed uh, for them between the Republic to the Empire. Not, in a way, because the separatist side was just the rod at the core of the Republic, breaking off, fighting the Republic, and the Republic reincorporating all of it, but without the middleman. Sort of the rot becomes the point. It becomes the whole thing. There's nothing for the Republic to be without that rot holding it together. And so it just becomes what it always kind of was on its face. And so both coalesce, the separatists and the Republic become what they kind of always were, which is the same, united together, forming a mask off empire with more of a specific design. Because, I mean, Lucas is said going in that, like, the point of the prequels, the theme, the central idea was that democracies are not destroyed, they're sold.
Right. It's funny, in the Revenge of the Sith novel, Palpatine literally says in the speech, which is a different speech from the movie, he says, "We must evolve. We must grow. We have become an empire, in fact. Let us become an empire in name as well. We are the first galactic empire." Um, it's kind of funny, like, yeah, he's basically saying, yeah, we've always kind of been an empire, just we've never
Mm-hmm.
really admitted it to ourselves. Um, which I do think is kind of the U.S. parallel there as well. I've always said that the thing about America, and I think other people have said this too. 'Cause I'm not just mimicking. Well, maybe I never said it, but I've heard people say this, and I kind of agree with. Like, think about the American Empire for a while, and maybe is that I've always felt like we're kind of an empire in denial. Um,
Yeah.
because we do all the empire stuff, military bases, dots stuff, coups, whatnot. But like, we can't outright say we're an empire like the British or even like the Russians or the Germans, or because like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
goes against our story of, well, we fought off an empire and we got our independence. Like, yay us, we're rebels, man.
And what's
Um,
interesting is that wasn't always the case. It's like that's the formation of the post-war
mhm,
order,
right.
because we talked positively about being an empire and the aspirations of an American empire, and like people ran on talking about our empire and whatnot in the turn of the previous century. Like, we talked about getting the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and the intention was to get Cuba as making the American empire. Like, it was very explicitly the idea. Those were the terms that people like Roosevelt were talking in.
Mhm,
And there was a sort of change in rhetoric
mhm,
and a change in self perception during World War II. Or really, you could argue at World War One's end, with the dissatisfaction with the war and the isolationist tendency, that it became unpalatable to be like, yeah, we're going to expend a bunch of money, spend a bunch of blood in order to be an occupying empire, after Europe just proved and America jumped in at the end just how costly and destructive and vile imperialism is. That doing it was sort like what had already been done was sort of kept intact
mhm.
and would be kind of maintained, but for a brief while, like the 20s and 30s, there was sort of this attitude of just, that's distasteful, or we don't really want to bother with that,
Well,
because it had
mhm,
destroyed those other countries. Germany was an up and coming empire born around, later than the US, and had already destroyed itself.
yep. And it's interesting because like you look at like situations like the Suez Crisis, which was like
Mhm.
America did not side with the British. We were like, nah, you gotta stop this. You don't like this. Now, probably for not for like moral reasons, but it is kind of interesting how like Britain, our ally, who could have been, and I'm just saying this in like just pure geopolitical terms, could have been like keeping the British Empire could have maybe kept commies at bay, or was just geopolitically strategic. It's like, nah, Britain, you gotta give this up. It's not good image. Even though
Hmm.
a lot of national liberation wars, well, there were like obviously independent countries that did go our way, and we made it go our way. A lot of them also went the Soviets' way, became Soviet allies for many years.
Yeah, I mean the U.S.
So it's
There's
kind of
that weird constellation of like the U.S., England, and France, sort of all being at each other's throats in like the 40s and 50s, and then England falls away and becomes just an American puppet, where it is still today. But France doesn't. France has its own foreign affairs. France has its own power projection. France wants to have its own European army, as Macron, beats the drums about all the time. It's like France
thank you, De
has,
Gaulle, I guess, for that one.
yeah, essentially. France has negotiated its own, done its own foreign policy during the Cold War and stuff, and so there is a split there. But yeah, it's interesting the way that Star Wars sometimes goes back to reinforcing that. So I mean, I guess you want to talk about the sequels and the New Republic.
I mean, yeah, we can talk about the New Republic, talk about Ahsoka a little bit. And who knows what the post sequel era it will be right now. Yeah, I mean, it's. I definitely think that. I also think, I mean, the way that we treated the New Republic. Obviously, some of it was just we wanted our rebels versus Empire.
Mm-hmm.
I also kind of think it's. I also think it's a little bit of the generational shift from Lucas's. I mean, I don't want to just say from going from boomers to Gen Xers, but a little bit. There's definitely some of that where I think there's a lot more of a cynical take on just the institutions in general, um, which I think is just kind of a Gen X thing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think to say the First Order is MAGA is a little is obviously well, I think it's a little bit is again like I was saying, these one-on-one parallels never work. Even though it is kind of again funny the resurgence of fascism in general and just this reactionary crisis and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. It's interesting, and I do think just the way other lore and stuff have played it again. This is I mean I guess this is what I want to talk about earlier. Is again I actually do think that regardless of Episode 9, I actually still maintain that the rise of the First Order is actually a more interesting rise than Palpatine's rise because, and some of this is just the expanded material has kind of made it so like Palpatine isn't just the one doing it everything. Where it's like the First Order, I think would have happened regardless because of just the way of the First Order is not just they're really hard. They're trying so hard to not make it just Palpatine, but like it is other warlords and Thrawn and just the people the right they believe in this idea, and I just eventually one warlord would have taken over and formed something new. Um,
I think what's neat about the First Order though is
mhm.
it doesn't seem to be built around a warlord. Like even
Yeah,
Snoke seems kind of incidental in episodes 7 and 8. Like he just
yeah,
sort of is the guy who stumbled into this um after it was already formed. Like he didn't
but
form it himself.
yeah, that's more or less how they're playing it. Even with 9, it's just it's basically the First Order was already kind of forming. And basically, Palpatine's like, well, I don't want it to be too independent of me because I'm an egotist. So I'm going to put Snoke here. He's going to be the supreme leader, but he's more or less not built. He didn't build the infrastructure. He just like, we'll make you the guy who kind of manages it all. But
Yeah.
we built more or less the infrastructure anyway. And it's I was actually saying this again because I'm reading the Kylo Ren comics. It's kind of funny how yeah, like even though Snoke dies, and you could say, well, Kylo Ren is the Vader aspect, but like the First Order doesn't collapse into warlordism. It seems like the
Mhm.
institutions are kind of sticking around, even though Huck's
Yeah,
Empire.
it's so cult like. It's why the Final Order is so disappointing because the First Order already is a cult without literally being a cult that like dresses like Palpatine and chants Sith stuff over and over again.
That's
Like
fair.
it's already the idea of this military junta cult thing. They already worship the power and symbolism of the Empire, making it so literal, and not just that, but also making, oh no, Palpatine literally had a secret thing of, if these are the most radical fringes of the Empire that form the First Order, then there's a secret society of millions of even more radical, more loyal people to Palpatine who were just unaccounted for. Palpatine had an entire empire in tandem of people who worshipped him. Not even like a say what you will about Vitiate / Valkorian. At least he had a different personality and like body and stuff when he built the Eternal Empire. Like at least that was a different guy with a
Right.
different like theming to the people who were worshiping him. He had two different empires he was building. Palpatine built loyalists to the Empire outside of the Empire and like a significant amount, while also having a splinter of loyalists to the Empire within the Empire who survived past the Empire. But those are two different things. It kind of hurts. I don't think they knew what they obviously they didn't know what they were going for originally. I mean, Abrams' whole thing was repeat A New Hope, and the mild suggestion was sort of the old cliche of Argentina becoming a Nazi haven.
I think like they kind of continue that a little bit in the Mandoverse with the Warlord networks.
Yeah, the Mandoverse does a bit of a more interesting thing where they play. They haven't gone into the whole thing with like there is still Imperial space in the New Republic era.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's a little bit more interesting and sort of more of a parallel to real life, because I mean the Argentina stuff is, I found out, quite literally built on one pamphlet written by the former, like the American ambassador to Argentina who got kicked out, and who was when the U.S. wanted to coup Peron. Like World War II wasn't even over yet, and he wrote an article about a novel thing about how
Mm-hmm.
literally like all of Nazi high command was secretly going to Argentina, and we have to get rid of Peron. Like it's so blatant,
Oh gosh.
but which is it's the funny thing of like there is that it is an allegory for, and that was what it was pitched as. Is like, oh, this is going to be kind of an allegory for Nazis in Argentina building a thing, but it's like it's an allegory for something that doesn't exist because that's not what happened. Like there was a reconstituted
Mm-hmm.
Nazi government. Call it West Germany. Like the most of them stayed in power. It's like a different thing. And since then, there has been playing with it. The Operation Paperclip stuff
Mm-hmm.
is obviously what we saw in Mando. We have a little bit of the Rump State stuff that is more of like a West federal German parallel thing that's interesting.
Well, I know some people have. I mean, you can maybe talk about the New Republic. It's like just gone out and said the New Republic's West Germany, which I don't like because I feel like that's kind of a. I mean, look. I mean, I'm not going to defend Mon Mothma as like the best politician ever. But I feel like it's kind of an insult to Leia and the gang. I think they tried harder than that. At least I hope
Yeah,
so.
well, I don't think Mon Mothma had like a government instituted program that lasted for several decades, sending like orphans to live with as foster children to registered pedophiles. I'm just saying the New Republic didn't do that. West Germany did.
And I also like we talk about Operation Paperclip stuff. I mean, if we were doing Operation Paperclip, Thrawn would have been appointed the supreme commander of the army, not the guy who wants to take it over, right? Like
Yeah,
that's what you
yeah.
Veered would be like chief of staff of the New Republic military.
Veers would so be. Yeah, he really would.
So it's. I mean, this is sort of again this is where I think the sequels and the new Mandoverse kind of fall into where more expanded universe territory because I think it's just been an evolution since 2015 where it's like you start off with like okay, First Order is the Argentinian thing that doesn't really exist but we think it does because we like it in fiction. But
Mm-hmm.
then I'll just say it. Then Trump happens. That definitely influences how people view it. How people read it. I think that's how influencing even today how people write it. Um, and also just and then of course you get Mandoverse, which I think is also like you said. I think it is doing more interesting things with the Imperial Remnant in general. Of like, these warlords aren't just mini states like I kind of think my hot take is always been I think the warlords were kind of allegory for a lot of the post-Soviet states, like the stands, all the stands, um, stands, where it's like got Gideon who's got a planet, Pelion, Thrawn. They seem like they have more like networks hidden across planets. Got that one guy in the Mandalorian movie who's just a criminal at this point, who's bald guy, Coin, Johnu Coin, who at this point is just a criminal
I
who
wonder if there's a civil war between any of them, like what happened with Tajikistan.
hey, maybe that'd be interesting. But yeah, it's like I also find it funny like these warlords just act like more like mafioso, which is like again, Baldy warlord is more. He's not even like he's an imperial. He got stormtroopers, but it's like he's basically more of like crime boss who sells salt on the black market, and funds gladiator arena rings. Um, he just lives in a big mansion with his stormtroopers. Um, so I think I think you kind of do lose like that central allegory as you kind of get more what the EU did, which is more like that mission mingle. But again, I do think a lot of the more centralized allegory does kind of stop before episode 1 and after episode 6 because again, it's just, it's all EU at that point
Mm-hmm.
without George. I'm not saying that you can get bad things, but like KOTOR doesn't really have a strong historical allegory. Like I don't know what the Sith Empire and Old Republic wars are for. I mean, or are playing against outside of just fantasy, which is fun.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's definitely. I mean, there's definitely like the general idea of collapsing, not even an empire, but just like collapsing states
mhm,
with KOTOR 2, with the whole thing of like Kodo calculating that the Republic will collapse,
mhm,
the importance of making sure that the Telos
mhm,
reconstruction happens. Otherwise, there will be no spending for reconstructing the other planets and sort of
mhm,
all that. Like it's much more meditation on like general themes.
mhm.
It kind of allows itself to be its own thing more so. Uh, I do think like there's one element that interestingly kind of went through during the sequel trilogy that went through like two phases of historical and real world ongoing allegory
Mhm.
that by the end ended up being an allegory for nothing, which is Kylo.
That's true.
Because
That's
what do you
true.
think? Like, what do you think Kylo is starting off with in the sequel trilogy, like allegory wise, and sort of what they're trying to get at in terms of the real world or what inspired that?
Oh, that's a good question. Uh, well, I mean, obviously, I think you got a lot of the MAGA kid post. That's more post. Although
That's 2015. It's 2015. They're writing that in 2013, so that's before
school
that.
shooters, I guess, Marine.
That's the big one for me was, and that's how I always describe Kylo is he's a school shooter. Like the way it's framed in TLJ, in TFA and TLJ, is literally he destroys the school and kills the students. Like that's what he is, and that is prescient and interesting. And then I knew things were over and that I was just done when the Kylo Ren origin comics came out and revealed that Snoke had struck the temple with lightning and that Kylo didn't kill anyone that night. And
Oh
that was the moment I
yeah.
was like, okay, I'm done. This is like where you had this interesting idea of this very privileged child, like kid, who feels kind of disaffected, and then very obviously play with real world like imagery and ideas that were and still are. I mean, 2015 is oh my god, what's the Florida skull?
I don't remember.
Parkland.
That's so many. That's so sad for me to say. There's so many
Parkland,
podcasts.
the Parkland kids and everything. Um, or like David Hogg or whatever his name is.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, it's been so long, dude, and there's so many at this point. So
yeah, but
that's
like the
just a sad
big
state.
one, which was more of an ongoing thing at that point. It was more,
Mhm.
yeah, we used to pay attention to that more. We used to talk about it. There was always a new one, but it would be 2 months of one, and then the next one happens, and it's 2 months of that instead of kind of just never focusing on any of them because it is so constant. Uh, and
Mhm.
that was something Star Wars felt like it was actually commentating on and like talking about that there was stuff happening there, and then we needed to sand off those edges and make Kylo a Wooby because he's just misunderstood and he never hurt anyone. And now they're kind of trying to fix that with the comics.
It's
Uh,
definitely it's I will say there is one aspect of Kylo's backstory that still I think is interesting, but it's also something I'm actually don't want them to kind of a deal with because it's a little because Star Wars does not handle these kind of questions very well anyway, and that is I call it Kylo's dark side schizophrenia, which the idea is that
mm,
he's been hearing voices in his head since he was a kid. Uh,
oh yeah.
um, which they're kind of playing with in this recent comic, where we actually get to see
Mm,
the Vader helmet talk back to him. Um, which is kind of funny, but it's like he's been hearing, it is kind of that it kind of sounds like schizophrenia, um, in a sense.
yeah.
Oh, speaking of sequel era stuff, I I think it's there. I just think, like a lot of Star Wars, it's kind of clunky, but I think you can say it's there. How much do you read into the Jewish allegory for the Mandalorians with Jon Favreau? Um, the search for the homeland situation. Not isn't Jon Favreau Jewish? I forget.
Yes, he I believe he was um was
Mm.
studying to become a rabbi, and I believe his father passed away, and then he left to join film school.
Oh, you learn something new every day. Because I know people kind of read that into the Mandalorian. Like, I think that's why one episode is called "The Spies," which is we thought it was an actual spy, but it's like
Yeah,
a word that's a Jewish word. I'm not quite sure.
yeah, it has to do with Moses sending spies out into the land of the Canaanites
Mhm.
at the end of the Exodus. They've been traveling for decades, and sending spies to scope out the land before entering. Though
Mhm.
Moses dies prior to that. I forget if that was Moses just ahead of time or if that was Joshua who replaces him. I think. Uh, but yeah, it's specifically that idea of sending out
Mhm.
scouts or spies to look at the promised land ahead of time, which is what that was referencing. So yeah, very much rooted
Mhm.
in Judaism with that. I think it's definitely there. You definitely get some of the like esoteric
Mhm.
stuff with the Mandalorians. They are more religious oriented in the show.
Especially the cold people, the helmet
Hmm.
people, the helmet folks. Um,
Yeah, there's definitely stuff going on there. Uh, but also so what do you think the other parallel that I know for sure Adam Driver talked about?
oh shoot. Okay, school shooters. It's been so while. Is it the radicalization of from 9/11? Because I know that's why he was a Marine for a little
It
bit.
was radicalization and has to do with 9/11, but not on the that side. But it was from the Marine stuff. I remember in an interview he talked about, and this was like after Force Awakens came out, but like
Mhm,
before TLJ, that
mhm,
he talked about sort of partially inspiring Kylo on the radicalization of people who joined ISIS.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot. Oh, you know
And
what? That's a, First Order had
it
those
makes
ISIS tones too.
it makes in the Kylo Ren thing, Kylo Ren being and I said just makes so much sense
Mhm,
and is such a good observation by Adam Driver
mhm,
because it's not just crazy guy in a cave or person who has been tormented by like oppressive power who
mhm,
breaks and goes crazy. It's such a good observation by him. I assume this is what he was getting at. Was like Ben
mhm,
Solo comes from this incredible amount of privilege. He is essentially the scion of like two of the most important family lines in the galaxy,
mhm,
and things don't work out so perfectly for him, and he feels like a bit of an outsider.
mhm,
And so he joins a fundamentalist organization that tells him that he, despite all his incredible privilege, the mild discomfort or like lack of fulfillment he feels is
mhm,
the fault of everyone else, and that he has all this potential that he's being intentionally held back from, and that he should go and start doing terror stuff. And it's like that's the core of who ISIS was recruiting from. Was not like this wasn't the insurgency in Iraq.
right.
This wasn't even Al Qaeda. These weren't militias exactly. They recruited from like well off, some very upper class.
Mhm,
Like I mean that's more of like a old Taliban thing with like Bin Laden and like being like the fail sons of very prominent, like unfathomably rich families.
mhm,
But also with ISIS, those were those guys and people who, if not upper class,
mhm,
were males in a patriarchal society, were upwardly mobile or at least decent off, and had a bunch of privilege, but who felt disaffected to some extent and decided to just put all their chips in on making their own caliphate, and not just like even for one. I mean, we saw this with
mhm.
I think in Raqqa, where like every block essentially was a was its own caliphate for a bit, and they would just overthrow each other, and it like that. But that privileged person or person with a decent amount of relative privilege
Mhm.
lashing out is again that's so prescient, and that is exactly what a lot of those ISIS guys were, or people from the first world who are
Mhm.
disaffected, who decide to who are like diaspora, who decided to join, who are pretty well off but got manipulated. I mean, there's so much of that as like the core of the people who were recruited, people who were doing like it just for some weird sense of adventure or because they were promised something as a result.
It's
And that's what Kylo is in the first two films, the sequel trilogy.
yeah, it's interesting that I think that makes the First Order in general both interesting, but also, especially we're just counting the first two movies for half a second, but also kind of weird too. Because I remember when you and I used to talk about how the First Order had that ISIS vibe, but the First Order, if you believe, just forget the book, just the movie itself, they're not recruiting people; they're stealing babies, um,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of brainwashing them. I mean, I'm sure people go do that too. Don't get me wrong, but like they didn't recruit their army; they just stole their army. Really, Kylo is the joiner. Um, and um, out of them, and then obviously the empire and the officers are probably like all children of Imperials. Um, as well. Although it is interesting how even by the TLJ you start to see like the old guard Empire versus the new guard Huxers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you see they've been trying to do a little bit more with that in like a recent comic to kind of show like, oh, Pride's like an old school imperialist and Hux is like the new generation. Things like, oh, you guys are all a bunch of oldies. Screw you. First Order's better. Empire's old and decrepit. Um, yeah. So I think that kind of makes for like an odd allegory as well. But no, I think you're right. It's been interesting kind of seeing the evolution and kind of like you know, kind of like I think a lot of it sometimes it's just accidental. I mean, this is where I kind of like wonder, like, how much of it was all accidental? Like, whoops, we didn't actually know to some extent where we were going. Well, I guess that's true. Um, with some of this stuff, and like now we gotta look back and like kind of make it all work, especially in today's age. Like, again, first order can be ISIS, but now it can be MAGA. Now it can be this and that. It's an odd evolution for sure. Um, one more thing, and then we can kind of wrap it up as we kind of head into the final kind of quarter here. So I just finished watching The Ninth Jedi. Great show. I said it to you on Facebook, but I'll say it here. If you ever want to disprove why if you ever want to prove why the Gray Jedi suck as a concept, show them The Ninth Jedi. I'm serious. It legit, like, just outright says why that concept just shouldn't work, and it doesn't. Um, but I found one interesting in terms of like if it was pulling from any historical allegory was um I found it interesting. I think it felt very probably more feudal Japan, although somebody said China, but probably more feudal Japan of just warlord eras, like literal like there is no central government, there is no center. It is just an era of warlords and feudal lords and samurai and the Jedi Order or the samurai and the Order and whatnot. I just thought that was really interesting as well as to something to kind of pull from. And as we kind of get into Star Wars, kind of hopefully moving beyond the saga era one day, you know, what eras of history would be interesting to kind of pull from and like allegories? Like, how could you really make an old Republic era feel like it's actually trying to pull from history and not just typical fantasy? Here's a bunch of lightsabers smacking around each other. Like, even the High Republic, as much as I think there's a lot of again that contradictory, it was trying to pull from like a little bit of like what people thought the '60s were, like Camelot, but also the frontier and the Western stuff. And it's like, I thought that was an interesting mix as well. And I was kind of curious, like what could we pull from, like what both from today, but also of the past as well. Like, you know, should I could I would want to be careful, but at the same time, you could see the old Republic era as like the era of the religious crusades, because like yeah, it's basically just two religious nations going at it.
Or just
Uh,
bring back the Pius Dea
yeah,
stuff.
that too. I would love to see a
Uh,
bias day of Star Wars. That'd be fun. Uh,
yeah, I would love like a multipolar galaxy for the Republic to contend with. If they're gonna go like old school, throw it back to like the era of great powers.
that'd be fun.
So I don't know who like the Republic would be in that scenario, but coalitions, wars between like three or four different sides, inter-imperial or inter like sphere of influence conflict. Maybe even play with. I mean, heck, the Republic seemingly has always been a republic. Kind of make it like the wars of coalition against revolutionary France, and sort of the Republic represents like a dangerous polity, and so
Hmm.
you don't even have to make it like super revolutionary or political, but just play with that idea of one political system that is different from all of the ones surrounding it and being under siege in that way would be neat.
That would be neat. You mentioned the Republic has always been a republic. I have always wanted. It's kind of the opposite of what you mentioned a little bit, but I've always wanted the idea, and this is why again I think we should bring back the Pious Day stuff or something.
Hmm.
Is I've always wanted the idea of the Republic having slides of authoritarianism. It's just Palpatine just kind of went the extra mile with the Empire stuff, and what I mean by that is let's have moments of more authoritarian chancellors, but who didn't just like completely declare themselves the Galactic Emperor,
Hmm.
like you know, uh, like even like we talk about like people always get a little bent out of shape, like oh no, Trump worst authoritarian president. Like, did you live through Bush? Did you live through Woodrow Wilson? I've read
Yeah,
Woodrow
I always
Wilson.
think of
You know,
of
Trump's just
when
the most
was
blunt about it.
yeah, like I always think about like this. I think it's like from Chapo Trap House, and they were talking about I think it was like early in the first Trump admin, and they were sort of talking about that topic, and like the people understandably reacting to this was like early in the ICE stuff during the first admin, or might have been the Muslim ban, and sort of like being like, yeah, it's good people are talking about this and getting angry, but also frustrated with the lack of context people seem to have. And one of them, Felix, I think, made just a very angry kind of outburst that always sticks with me. Whereas, like, I'm not unsympathetic to the idea of, hey, maybe this is fascism, but you look me in the eyes and tell me you remember all of that stuff, a million dead Iraqis. What the f was that? Like, if this is fascism now, what was that? Like, you have to reckon with that before don't tell me about the. You don't complain about this moment until you explain to me what that was and identify that properly.
Right.
Sort of thing.
And I would like the idea of the Republic having other just bad chancellors, and not like in the Valorum bad, but more like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, they were actively authoritarian. It's just that they actually decided to not declare empires, and they left after their terms were done because they were like still, or for some reason, weirdly just okay with that. So like like, cause like it's the Republic. Palpatine had to get this idea of an authoritarian republic from somewhere outside of just he's a Sith. I think it would just be a little bit more real if, like, yeah, the Republic has had slides of authoritarianism before, and it will happen again. Um, I think that would be interesting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like what I would look at for in terms of polities as in terms of just pulling from allegory. um Oh, I guess before we leave, one more thing, and then we can really wrap up. We didn't talk about it. Did you want to talk about Onderon? I feel like you had to wanted to go
Yeah,
at it. Let's go at it. Our
it
favorite planet.
frustrates me that it's weird because I get that like Lucas has said before, like, oh, in my day it was the Viet Cong, and then it was the Mujahideen, and now it's uh, Al Qaeda or the Taliban, and it's like I understand his point, but at the same time, those are very different organizations for very different reasons for fighting. But more than that, the I kind of just don't get how Onderon's supposed to work as an allegory because we see the Republic constantly get involved in stuff as long as there is a separatist planet. Like if a planet joins this Confederacy, it is at war with the Republic. The idea that the Republic cannot get involved because it's an internal matter and Onderon chose to leave because a new king decided that, because that's why that happens. They have to fund rebels because Onderon left the Republic after the king got deposed. We've seen like, well, then they have no right to be on like freaking Megiddo. Then the Confederacy, the independent systems, and the banking clan left the Republic. Like it doesn't work as an allegory for the thing. It's kind of like they want to do the U.S. supported the Mujahideen and specifically supported Bin Laden thing, and that's a really fascinating historical moment and interesting to talk about.
Mhm.
But it is it annoys me how sloppily that was done because it's like if it was just like inspiration of we just kind of want to play with the idea of the Republic sort of accidentally creates the foundations for the rebellion. That's one thing, but it's so obviously trying to be an allegory, not just like the vibe of that it becomes weird because it doesn't work as an allegory for that because it's like, well, you have Afghanistan was not previously a part of the American it was not a US state that left, uh, and then the U.S. supported the Mujahideen. It's like it's a different circumstance where it's the domino theory stuff and the coup and everything, and it gets into. I mean, the fact that we have the rebels and that I get that it's a kid show and this is supposed to be the foundation for the Rebel Alliance, but it is kind of disquieting to have them like knock over a police car once or twice, and that be the extent of their radical acts that are too much for the Republic and maybe too much for the Jedi. When it's like the crime, it's a good thing that the Republic backs them in the context of the show. There's no
Right.
negative. There's no real moral quandary about that. The Jedi have to act in a very stupid way that is the classic thing that I think Dave Filoni does a lot of moral quote unquote complexity with the Jedi, really just making the Jedi a bunch of old fuddy duddies. They just don't understand, man, out of nowhere, and then go
Yeah.
back to normal. But then they have to just suddenly act like that for like a scene or for an arc.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that just doesn't work when you're making an allegory for the US supporting fundamentalist Wahhabists whose main target was like, especially during like the early terror era, period, like in 78 and 79, were like schools that were teaching women to read and stuff, like all that stuff that the US talked about, oh, we're invading Afghanistan to do, was actually being done in Afghanistan authentically by the Afghans.
Right. And
And
also,
we literally gave missiles to the people to kill those women. Like, that's a thing that, if you're going to do an Afghanistan parallel, reckon with that somewhat. Don't just reckon with the problem with this is it came back to bite us with 9/11. No, the problem with it was the problem with it in the first place. The Mujahideen of it all was the problem. Not the, there's a reckoning. It's the problem with Charlie Wilson's war as a film talking about that. Like, it's only a reckoning when there's blowback, not the act of violence itself. And it's weird to have that be the foundation for the rebels. And it's especially weird because it falls into the thing that a lot of stuff falls into, that I think like Metal Gear Solid 5, I think vaguely falls into, but does briefly make a note of, thankfully, and maybe one of the only pieces of media that does this, of Operation Cyclone, which is the operation that gave like Stinger missiles and everything to the Mujahideen,
mm-hmm.
predates the Soviets entering Afghanistan. Everyone talks about that, including I've seen like more civilization talk about this in a brilliant analysis, and they're very left wing, but like that's so reinforced that even they were like, the U.S. started supporting the Mujahideen after the Soviets invaded. 78 versus 79. Those are chronological events. Like it's really bad what happened, but also like the continuity of the horrible things that happened is a thing. And like, yeah, it's weird to simplify that down, as well as to simplify like what the homegrown communist government, the crimes that were being committed by President Amin and his like psychotic coups that were part of what happened. Like, the tragedy of what happened to Afghanistan starts even before the U.S. gets involved and goes way beyond the Taliban stuff. And it does kind of suck. The allegory is just there to be an allegory for the one thing Americans might know about that. It's weird to put a Cold War conflict that also is originally like it's a civil war. It's a domestic thing. Like, they had their own revolution, and things went out of hand and got gross, and you can definitely condemn that. But it's weird to make that your connection with like the Rebel Alliance and put that in the context of global war on terror. It just never sat right with me, the Onderon stuff.
Yeah, because, well, for one thing, the Clone Wars isn't the Cold War, the hot war, the fighting war,
Mhm.
the shooting war. And also, it's also kind of funny we're talking about the blowing up of schools for girls, which is horrible, but also like the Mujahideen of the Alderaan are led by a woman. named Steela.
Yeah,
Saul's not even the leader. It's just his sister. Guys. So that also doesn't make. But yeah, like what
I think
Saul
a
wants
more
to.
civilized age did a great joke about like, it really sucks that if Steele had stayed in power, she probably would have had to like kill Saw, just like out of like cleaning up like her ascendancy to power and shoring up there's no rivals.
Uh, what does Saul want to institute some sort of religious fundamentalism?
No,
Uh,
just like as like a left wing revolution thing. It's like if it is Afghanistan,
yeah.
then Steela is uh Taraki, and Saw is Amen, but he doesn't kill. Ahsoka's the one who freaking kills Steela. Let's be honest. It's her literally fumbling.
And then does that make the king we reinstall Barbara Carmel or Najibullah?
Yeah, yeah, and then I guess yeah, it's weird. I wish they had just went full in and just made the whole arc parallel to Tarakai and Amen and their power struggle, and have a scene where like one of them goes to visit Dooku, who clearly supports the other one, or like would rather the other one but doesn't want to interfere,
Mm-hmm.
but have like the new king go and tell Dooku like, I think I'm gonna kill the other king. And Duke could be like, you shouldn't do that. I don't think you should be doing that. And have him be like, but will you stop me? I think you should make the right choice. And him being like, okay, I'll do it. I'll go kill him, walking out, and just, you think he's gonna kill him? No, he's not gonna actually do it. It was a moral test, and then just hear gunfire in the background because that's essentially what happened.
Oh gosh.
Was Chernenko, I believe it was at the time. No, it was Brezhnev. Kept pushing it off, and has a meeting in Moscow with Amin, where Amin essentially alludes to wanting to imprison and execute Tar, who's kind of sharing power with, who the Soviets like way more and the KGB trusts way more,
Mm-hmm.
and who's like a way more popular leader in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But Amin is like alluding to it, and I forget if by that point it's Andropov yet, but he sort of says like, I can't stop you if you're gonna do so. Like he's clearly like, you really shouldn't do that, but I'm not gonna dictate policy, but like, don't do it. And then he just does it, and then the Soviets. That's why the Spetsnaz arrive, and Amin thinks that they're Americans actually at first, and is like, no way that the Soviets are invading because they totally gave me permission to do this. The like it's like giving the kid the pack of cigarettes to be like, okay, smoke the whole pack. You're not expecting him to actually smoke the whole pack.
We don't want to interfere. Oh shoot, they killed each other. Damn it.
My man took like a whole. They took like a whole year. Like it's insane. They so much goes wrong because they just keep flip flopping, and because Amin thinks that like every bit of intelligence that's coming in is false because he gets a bunch of false intelligence. It's a weird situation, and Pakistani intelligence is super involved, and like he also wouldn't. He was claiming that like everyone was trying to secretly overthrow him, but
Mm-hmm.
also he was claiming that the one country he would not condemn was the U.S. So he was simultaneously like really hardline, like we need to do a full revolution and fully become like like a Soviet government right now. When the Soviets are like, you should take it slow and just do whatever like kind of makes sense with Afghanistan's conditions, and he's like, no, full like great leap forward, baby, let's do it.
Oh
Also,
no.
America's my friends, and I'm going to keep an open dialogue with them. And everyone is just like, what the heck is? Are
Um.
you like a? Who are you? What is this guy doing?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. But they're like, in. This is Afghanistan. A lot of people are very conservative still.
And
Gotta ease
rural.
and rule. And you don't really have a proletariat. You came to power in a military coup, pretty much.
The whole thing with Parcham and Kalak party is just, it's a cluster. It's the tragedy goes far back.
You overthrew Daoud Khan, man. Yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, Star Wars and Allegory. I
Yep.
think
Star Wars Allegory. We ends with a conversation about the history of communist Afghanistan, as
yeah.
it should, as it should.
Look,
But no,
the next trilogy, whatever we do in the future for Star Wars, we need just more progressively more obscure American presidents to secretly to be who the villain is based on.
oh, absolutely.
Like I'm waiting for Polk. I'm waiting for my Sith Polk.
Oh my, President Sith Taft. Let's get Sith Taft. He's the
You
Supreme
shall
Court.
be Darth Rutherford B. Hayes.
Yes, and I still want us to go in the past and do like Chancellor Woodrow Wilson, most authoritarian chancellor before Palpatine. He
You can do
seg-
so many bad Star Wars name spellings.
he segregates the federal government so that the Nemoidians are over here and the humans are over there.
Oof.
Um, I'll just say that is kind of one thing I feel like we've. I'm sorry, I'm continuing this. I will make this quick. It is kind of fascinating, but kind of sad. I feel like we've kind of downplayed lately the anti-alien stuff. I feel like that goes
Mhm.
back and forth depending on who's writing it. Because that's
And
one of
Andor didn't want to be silly, and
the,
so kind of accidentally skips over the Empire seems to lack discrimination.
I know people have told me that, and that is the weird thing about the Empire in Andor. It and some of the screen stuff in general, because I mean, okay, it's not all of it. I do think some of it, but like, I'm sorry, but I have to bring this up now. It is weird that the Gormans weren't aliens. I always thought they were
Mhm.
aliens. I always thought they were like a species, not French humans. And
Yeah, I mean, I guess they are. I guess they are somewhat subhuman. That's such a dark way to. Like they aren't human. They're French.
they're French. And look, maybe I can maybe understand it if the lesson is like, oh, now the Empire is now targeting the equivalent of humans, which is basically the equivalent of white people. Like, okay, now you're going after the white people. This is when the rich people actually start to pay attention. It's like, before aliens, people of color, who cares? But oh shit, I thought we were cool, man.
And I do think that's part of what they are going for. It's just the show never like precedes that with overt ambivalence to alien suffering.
Like
If season one had had
the Nakina arc should have been that, right? Like the jail Andor then should have been filled with aliens.
yes, there should have been a point earlier in the series, like in season one, where it's obvious and like the galaxy kind of just knows. Like we should have seen Wookiee slaves, or we should have seen just horrifying stuff be done, and people just not care or be like, or even Mon Mothma be like upset about it, but be like, I don't think we can like try and do her Gorman, kind of preparing for a Gorman speech moment, and then having Bale or someone be like, they're not gonna care yet, like they're and just be like despair, like have that be a moment of, oh, they're not gonna give a damn yet about this. But kind of lack that, unfortunately.
And I feel like they're trying to substitute it, but it might not be. I mean, I think it may be just Andor. I do think other material does do it better. It just depends on the material, really, and who's
Mhm.
willing to have more aliens and stuff.
Solo.
That's
Solo is the thing that actually does it.
that's true. Solo is just maybe like the core equal white and the outer rim equal the other, and it doesn't matter if you're human. If you're you're outer rim human, you're still space trash. And I don't know if that completely works.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. Now I'm gonna end it. I think we ended it on we ended it on a Star Wars thing. Although it was fun talking about communist Afghanistan because I like that stuff too. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Red, for joining me. I was glad we had this topic. It was fun.
Mm-hmm.
This was inspired kind of by the Jedi Protestant Reformation thing and why that might not work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a fun topic too. Thank you everybody for joining us. If you want to follow us, of course. Oop, damn it. Ew. There we go. The one was working. Follow us on Blue Sky on can.bisky.social, where I am posting all sorts of new historical stuff. Where lately I posted about why Palpatine, where are my Palpatine Bonaparte the Third comparisons? Where's my Louis Napoleon is Palpatine comparison? Where are you guys at? Forget evil
Oh my!
German mustard.
Does this mean Trioculus is that Napoleon who got killed in an ambush by the Zulu?
I don't know. That'd be kind of cool. There we go. There's some historical
Food
allegory.
for thought.
Food for thought, people. Yeah, so I'm going to try all these sorts of weird, fun stuff. Yeah, follow us there. Follow us on the Star Wars Underworld Blue Sky as well. Follow us on the Discord. We shall be back next week. I don't know what the topic is yet. Master should be with us though. And again, thank you, Red, for joining us. And until then, I'll see you all later.